Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining me for another episode of the Mr. Healthy Habits Show. We are about to embark on a new series here within the show, and this next series of podcasts is going to be dedicated towards the subject of metaphysics and a series of lectures and readings that I've been doing regarding the topic. Now, first, I'd like to remind you all to follow me on Instagram at philosophical.reminders and remind you to subscribe and follow wherever you're listening to this podcast. And to go back and check the previous episodes that I have. I've got a lot of really good stuff here on various topics such as how to eliminate self-doubt, the topic of suffering, what is it, where it comes from. And there's a lot of metaphysical discussion within the podcast, as well as weight loss advice and just different perspectives and tips to help you get in the right frame of mind approaching your days and the weeks to come. Now, back to the subject here of metaphysics. So what exactly is metaphysics? Metaphysics is the discussion or study of the hard problems in philosophy and science. For this podcast and this series of podcasts, we are going to be discussing more specifically the hard problems of consciousness, what it is exactly, where it comes from, and different theories of the brain and the mind and how they work together and how one causes the other, or how they both coexist, or how neither one of them exist. Now, in this series of lectures that I've been listening to, they go over in detail the different theories of the mind and what exactly it is. And we're also going to discuss competing views and poke holes in a lot of these theories. And will we come out with some type of answer in the end as to what consciousness is? Probably not. It is an answer that many philosophers and metaphysicists and scientists think that we just might never really be able to fully grasp or really understand for a variety of reasons. But in this episode specifically, we are going to start off by discussing soul theory. So this episode will be dedicated towards the theory of a soul, and that our mind is a soul and some type of entity that exists within our biological construct. We're also going to attempt to poke holes in this theory and discuss why many leading philosophers and scientists alike disagree with this theory and have more or less kind of, I don't want to say debunked it, I don't want to say have thrown it out, but more or less have kind of decided that this probably isn't what's going on here. But there are competing views also that I've heard for the existence of some type of soul, and we'll discuss those as well and get into the ideas here and concepts of what I believe the soul is. Now, a lot of this is going to cover different discussions that we've had in the past. I've done previous episodes about this, so we're going to be sharing some new ideas here as well. And from here on, we're going to go into other theories of the soul in later episodes. And next week, we'll discuss several other theories as to what exactly the mind could be or how it comes into being. So let's start off by discussing the difference between brain and mind as we currently understand it, or as we're going to be looking at it for the purpose of this podcast. So the brain is the physical, biological makeup of the brain that exists within your skull, and it has many different functions and is responsible for various things such as the beating of your heart, the working of your organs, many things that we are unconsciously aware of. It also allows us to speak and to receive senses and to see and to hear and to feel, to touch, to taste. And this is kind of where we get into gray areas as to, okay, well, what is this really? Is this the mind or is this a function of the brain? Leading science right now would point to thinking, memory, and problem solving. Personality is all really brain function. We can track very well these days what is going on within the brain when something takes place, when you have a task in front of you and a problem that you have to solve. We can very much look at the brain and see what parts of the brain are active, how they're working together, and what is going on within the brain when you solve a problem. When you recall things, when you see things, when you observe things, when you explain things, we can pretty much see how the brain is working and how it is active. Now, the mind, by contrast, is where many people believe our personality is housed, our thoughts, our desires, our wants, our beliefs. That can all be viewed upon as being of the mind. But is it of the mind or is it of the brain? And that is a discussion that is raging on within the philosophical and the scientific community these days ad nauseum. Recently, over the weekend, I watched a TED Talk on YouTube that was given by a leading neuroscientist who was discussing this very topic and had pointed out that the problem of consciousness really at this point isn't something to be solved. It's really not a problem anymore. We very much know how consciousness is created within the brain. We know what different parts of the brain are responsible for what different parts of the brain are responsible for a certain type of thoughts and problem solving skills and memory and beliefs, and we can see what's active. We know very much now these days that if you shut off the part of the brain that's responsible for beliefs, then you'll lose any kind of belief that you have, such as being an atheist or being a Catholic or a Protestant or what have you, or Jewish, or belief in God. We know how shutting off certain parts of the brain can affect our personalities and change who we are. We know where kindness comes from in the brain, where happiness comes from, where sadness comes from. And by altering the physical composition of the brain, you can change someone's personality. So the argument there comes forth, is there such a thing as the soul? Is there anything else other than brain? I mean, if there was, then you would think changing our biological composition wouldn't have any effect on our personality. If there was something else, something beyond the brain that contributed to our personality. So many leading neuroscientists basically believe that they kind of have this cracked at this point. We know where awareness comes from in the brain. We know where reasoning comes from in the brain. We know why we experience ourselves as an autonomous entity. And the reason is because our brain has just developed in a way where we experience everything from being inside this body. I mean, we experience life as if we were trapped inside this body. And this body gives us this illusion of a self. It gives us this belief that we are a being, that we are something autonomous within the universe because we experience everything from inside of a head. And really the reason why we do that, it's just all brain function. It's all brain cognition. There really isn't anything there fundamentally that animates us. But there is a competing view on this, a competing school of thought. One of the arguments from that school of thought, the school of thought of the mind and possibly of the soul, is we still don't know how the brain is doing this. I mean, yeah, we can look at the brain and say, okay, this gland in the brain is lighting up whenever we have to reason or whenever we have to recall something in memory. This part of the brain lights up. But that is far away from explaining how that phenomena is created. I've discussed in a previous podcast how the sky isn't even blue. Our blood isn't even red. Red only exists in your mind. It doesn't exist in reality. All it is a particle wave. It's a particle wave that the brain interprets and creates this red phenomena. Now we can look at the brain and examine it and see what's happening when it produces this red phenomena. We can see the neurons firing and how the brain is working together to create this illusion of red inside our minds. But then we have this illusion of red and we have no idea how exactly it does that. I mean, we know what it's doing, but we don't know how it's doing it. We know the biological train that is taking place from our optic nerve observing a photon into our brain, and how our brain is then firing in a certain way to create this phenomena, this red experience. But we don't exactly know how that's happening. I mean, all we know is electrical impulses and neurons and nerves and brain tissue and the workings of it. But red, where exactly does that come from? That is the hard problem of consciousness. That is where metaphysics come into play. That is where we may never know the answers to these questions. We may never know how exactly the brain does that. I mean, we know that the brain is doing it, but we don't know exactly what in these neurons gives us this appearance of a red color. I mean, scientists can argue that we're coming closer to it. We can tell you, okay, well, this part of the brain is working with this part of the brain, and it's going to produce an image in front of us. And at the end of the day, really, it's not so much about us receiving input in from reality as much as it is the brain projecting reality out into the world. The brain is really largely creating our reality around us. But again, we're not quite sure how it's doing that. So now that we've discussed a bit about metaphysics and what it is and how it relates to brain and consciousness, we will go ahead and get into soul theory and exactly what is soul theory right here after the break. And I thank you for joining me. So thank you all once again for joining me back on the other side of that brief break from our sponsor. So now, getting back to the discussion here, we are going to delve deeply into the topic of the soul hypothesis and what exactly is it, and is it possible that there is something else out there that animates us from beyond? So let's first start off by defining or attempting to define what is the soul. So the soul is a metaphysical concept here that basically houses our personalities, our desires, our beliefs, our wants, and all of the things that make up us that are non-physical. Things such as our memories and love and happiness and our yearning to do good or to do bad in the world all comes from this concept of a soul and who we are. The soul hypothesis is this belief that there is a physical world which we inhabit, and somehow a existence outside of this physical plane has managed to step into our biological construct and animate us and basically breathe life into this physical being that we are, this physical construct that we inhabit. The soul hypothesis very much is the belief that we are the inhabitants of this body and of this realm, and that we really exist outside of all of this, that once this body dies, that there is something of us that will go on into eternity as a being that is the source of all of our desires and our love and our happiness and who we are fundamentally outside of the physical, biological makeup of our bodies. So why do people believe in this? Where does this belief come from, that we are a soul trapped inside of a body, a ghost in a machine theory, if you will? And this would largely come from the fact that we experience things from inside of a head, from inside of a body. We're very much uptaking senses in and processing what the world it has in front of us and formulating some kind of reality based on what we're taking in, what our senses are taking in. There's an experience that's taking place. There's a memory. We can recall the day before and the day before that and think about the future and ponder what's ahead. We have a personality, and you would largely think that a personality is not something that really can be attributed to a physical body. Matter doesn't have a personality. Matter doesn't have wants or desires or anything like that. It's just physical. It just is. It's just physics and matter, and that is basically the world that we inhabit. But soul theory exists in the sense that there is something else. Love is not a physical thing. Desires are not a physical thing. Happiness is not a physical thing. And those are very much aspects of the soul. That's where all of these concepts potentially come from. We step into a physical body and we carry with us these concepts and ideas that existed in a non-physical realm that we then bring with us into the physical world. That is largely what soul theory is. And also, I would add to it this belief that we are autonomous, that we all each have our own individual souls, and that they can communicate with one another, and that when we pass on, your soul, my soul, everyone else's soul leaves our bodies and stays an autonomous being, and is interconnected with the rest of the world in the sense that we affect it, but also in the sense that we're affected, but at the same time, very much autonomous and very much our own personal self, and not something that just exists collectively with everything else. So those are a few brief examples of a function of a soul. Now, also onto that, I would add that modern science has linked many of these things to the brain and brain activity. Love will send off sensors in the brain that react in a certain way, and you could basically, with the right kind of imaging and different brain scans, see what parts of your brain are lighting up when you're happy, when you're sad, when you bring in these things that we believed to have existed in a non-physical world into the physical world. We can very much see the areas of the brain that are lighting up and active when we experience these emotions and memory and whatnot. So is it possible that the soul uses the brain as a way to affect the physical? That is something that we are going to discuss here and in a brief moment in this podcast. But first, we are going to discuss a few concepts that were first introduced into the philosophical discussion here by Rene Descartes, who makes some of the most compelling arguments for the existence of a soul. And then we're pretty much going to go ahead and, with modern scientific perspective, dispel a lot of these. So Rene Descartes was a French mathematician, philosopher, and scientist who lived during the first half of the 17th century. And he has, to this day, made some very compelling arguments for the existence of a soul, but without the tools of modern science that we now have today. So now we're going to go over 3 different theories or reasons why Rene Descartes chose to believe in the existence of a soul. And we're also going to discuss a number of other possible reasons for the existence of a soul before we go ahead and take a look at this from more of a metaphysical, scientific perspective. So one of Rene Descartes' reasons for believing in the existence of a soul is simply because we can doubt that we have a body. We can doubt that our body exists, but you cannot doubt that your mind exists. We're very much inside of the head, and it would be pretty impossible to deny the fact that we are actually having experiences. I mean, we can deny that we have a body. I mean, in a dream, you experience a body inside of that dream, but that body is not there. But you cannot doubt that your mind is active in a dream state. You cannot deny that there is an experience taking place. So that's the first reason why Rene Descartes, or the first argument that he makes for the existence of a soul. The second argument that Rene Descartes might make for the existence of a soul is the fact that the body is divisible. You can cut off a leg or cut off an arm or sever the two in half. But your mind is very much not divisible, according to Rene Descartes. You are unable to split the mind like you can the body. So considering that they have 2 different properties, they must be different things. The same can be said for his argument in perspective that we are able to deny the existence of our body, but not the existence of our minds, and that we are having experiences. 2 different properties must correlate to 2 different things, 2 different beings or type of entities. The third and probably most compelling argument that Rene Descartes makes for the existence of a soul is the fact that we can imagine existing without a body. You can imagine just floating off into space or throughout the world as a mind with no body, but you cannot imagine existing with a body and no mind. If the mind is gone, then there is no experience to speak of. Whether or not your body exists is another matter, but we can imagine existing without the body, but not existing without the mind. If your experiences are gone, then essentially you are gone. So let's take these arguments from Rene Descartes with a modern scientific approach and examine them one by one. So we'll look at the first one, that being that you can doubt the existence of a body, but you cannot doubt the existence of your mind. Well, with modern science and availability of experiments that we can run on the brain and brain mapping and looking at the different parts of the brain that are active during various experiences, there is a very compelling school of thought or theory that exists that states that the mind is an illusion and that we really do not have a mind, and it really is just a matter of applied biology. It is different parts of the brain that are responsible for awareness and that are responsible for receiving and processing senses, problem solving and whatnot, that create this experience that we experience. I mean, it creates this illusion of a reality in front of us. And while this might not be the most intuitive of theories, if I am being honest with you, and I go further into the different theories that I've heard on the existence of a mind or a soul, it probably is the most compelling, and that being that it really is just a product of biology and senses being interpreted and different parts of the brain working together that create this illusion of consciousness. The Buddha himself believed that we were just a collection of parts working together that created this illusion of a self. And so when you look at this argument by Rene Descartes, can we imagine existing without a body? Yes, we can. Can you doubt the existence of your own mind? That is one that is going to rage on as a battle among the philosophical community. But yes, you can very much doubt the existence of your own mind and your own experience and exactly what we are. The second argument, that being that you can divide the body up into various parts, but you cannot divide the mind. Therefore, they must be two distinct, different things because they exhibit different properties. They are not one and the same. But we know now through modern technology that the mind actually can be divided up. There is a part of the brain that connects left and right hemisphere together. And if you sever that part of the brain, you essentially have two different minds. You will have a left brain and a right brain that at times are at odds against each other and work completely separate from one another. We do this even with a brain completely intact. I mean, every decision we're deliberating, we're of two minds about it. We're deciding, should we do this? Should we not do this? In many respects, the mind is already divided. It is not one solid thing that we have to work with. It's something that's very much back and forth and very much different parts of the brain struggling to compete with one another for function over what we do and what we say and how we operate. In many ways, you can make the argument that the mind is already divided and it is just struggling in many different aspects to come to a resolution on action. In some cases, you can argue that there is no mind and it is just different parts of the brain working together to try to come up with an action. It is one and the same. Is it a divided mind that's working together, or is it a divided brain that is working together to try to come up with a consensus about its interpretation of reality and what's in front of us? And here we go at the same time, doubting the existence of a mind. So there is credence here to the argument that you can doubt the existence of a body, but cannot doubt the existence of a mind. And we can go and make the argument that yes, you actually can doubt the existence of your mind. If you look at it, I mean, from a medical perspective, when you lie in the hospital bed and you watch someone die and you're watching them taking their last breaths, it's not like a light switch. I mean, they don't just, the heart flatlines and suddenly they're gone. That's not how it happens. The body dying is a process. The body shuts down very slowly. Their mind at one point is gone and they're incoherent and the heart rate slows. You can watch it slow from 80 to 60 to 50 to 40 to 30 to 20 beats per minute to 10 beats per minute. And it very much goes through the process of dying where the mind is gone, but the body is still there, still alive. So can we imagine existing without the mind, but with the body? Yeah, we very much witness it in hospital situations where someone is taken off a respirator and we watch them pass on. They're very much existing without a mind, without the brain function, but with the body, with the heart beating, pumping blood throughout the physical body. And as for Rene Descartes' second argument that the mind is not divisible, Well, we know now by studying split brain patients and by studying people with multiple personalities and really just an in-depth examination of our day-to-day that our mind is very much already a divided thing. It is not one solid thing that just experiences the world. I mean, it could think one thing 1 minute and then interpret something a completely different way the next minute or the next month or the next week or the next hour. It's all going to depend very much on what parts of the brain are having the greater influence over our perception of reality. And now to look at this question from a metaphysical or a scientific perspective, is it possible for something from beyond to animate our biology and give rise to consciousness? And from a scientific perspective, from the laws of Newton, the answer would be no, that physical events must have physical causes. And the soul, being a non-physical entity, would go against everything that we've learned as far as physics and the laws of Newton and the laws of science and how the universe works. That physical events must have physical causes, and we cannot have some non-physical entity going about causing physical changes to the environment. And furthermore, there's also Newton's principle that states that energy cannot be introduced or destroyed. You cannot create it or destroy it. All the energy that has existed throughout space-time exists at this very moment, and we cannot create more or destroy it. And in order for a soul to go about having physical effects, it would have to continuously add energy to the environment. And such a thing would just go against also too many different laws of science that we know today to be true. And if we look further into the topic here, okay, so let's say that something does step into me and animate me from beyond the physical world that I inhabit. There is another realm, another plane of existence that my brain is just unable to perceive and to process or interpret because of its own limitations. And this entity steps into me and animates me, and that is that you can call a soul. Well, by virtue of what is that mine? By virtue of what is that me? Whatever that is, if there is something that animates me, whatever that is, it's not an autonomous being that I can identify with and say that's me. It would very much, just like my physical body, be a product of the universe. It would have its source of creation and would exist as part of the universe, just as the physical world that I inhabit, and would therefore not belong to me in any way, shape, or form, but would belong to the universe just the same. It would be connected to your soul and everyone around you and everyone else around me. It would be of the same thing. It would be of the same part of the universe, from the same plane of the universe. It would be the universe that would step into us and animate us, not a being, not something that is autonomous. It would be just the same as the physical world that we inhabit. Everything that we see and that we experience is a product of the universe. It's a product of creation. It's stardust, and physics is really all that it is at the heart of it. And if there is something else that exists beyond the physical that we cannot perceive, it too is just the same, a product of the universe, and by no virtue of itself does it belong to me. There is no me for it to belong to. I am just a manifestation of the universe itself. So even if you do want to make the argument that there is something beyond that steps into us and gives us life and gives us consciousness, you can't really make the argument that by some virtue that this belongs to you. It very much does not. It very much would exist as a product of the universe that just as our body inhabits a physical world, it would step into us and animate us and animate everything around us. It would be part of my house. It would be part of the trees and part of the animals that inhabit this earth. It would be part of anything that experiences the universe around it. Anything that's affected by it would be a product of this. By virtue of no way does it belong to me. There is no me for it to belong to. And going back to brain function versus the function of a soul, when we look at the situation here and try to posit the soul as the experiencer of reality, we have to remember that what does it mean to experience something? What exactly is the soul doing when it's experiencing? Is it seeing? Is it hearing? Is it thinking? Is it feeling emotions? Well, now we have to remember that the emotions that we feel are really just a biochemical response of the body. It is a chemical that is released throughout different glands and different neurological and physical systems of our body that cause us to have these feelings that our brain then interprets as happiness or as love or as sadness. You see, we know from a medical perspective now what exactly causes emotions, and it is not the existence of a soul. You wouldn't need a soul to exist in order for us to experience happiness or love. I mean, it's very much a biological process. Hearing and seeing and smelling and tasting our senses, what we experience from the outside world, that is all brain function as well. I mean, can you see without eyes? Can you hear without your ocular nerve and your inner ear and the vibrations of tiny bones that will allow your brain to receive a signal and interpret it as an audio sound? That's a function of biology. It's not a function of a soul. I mean, if there is a soul, something that steps into us from beyond and it steps out of us, it no longer has an ear or eyes or anything like that. You know, what would be the point of us having ears and eyes and a nose and a mouth if our soul was what was experiencing all of this? We also know that thinking is very much a biological process. You can alter the physical makeup of the brain. You can alter its physical characteristics, and suddenly now thinking is a different process with different answers that we would arise at. It's very much not something that exists outside of brain function. But there is another argument to be made for the existence of a soul. The most compelling argument that I've heard so far comes from Michael Singer and his books on living from a place of surrender and the untethered soul, where he runs you through a thought experiment of looking in a mirror and then physically changing yourself and seeing what persists. Or there is another thought experiment that has been done a number of times throughout philosophical study, and Michael Singer also borrows from it, where you look in a mirror as your 8-year-old self, and then you look in a mirror today, and there is very much something there that persists. I mean, you can say, yeah, I physically have changed. Maybe I've mentally changed. I won't make the same decisions that I had made back when I was 8 as I am today. I may be fundamentally a different person, but I still have a chain of memory that goes all the way back there. There still is something here that is me, that persists as me. And what is that? You know, my body, my biological makeup is completely changed. Every 7 days or so, you know, we pretty much have a new body with new different cells and new different thoughts and processes taking place. We very much change in a physical capacity, but there is still something, despite all this change, that persists. And you can argue that it's just simply memory. It's just simply the brain's ability to recall and to have memories. But then Michael Singer very well might counter by asking the question, whose memory? Whose memory? It can't just be no one's memory. I mean, is it someone's memory? Does it belong to someone? Because if it does, well, then there you are. And if we are an illusion created by biology, well, then he asked the question, who is the illusion? Is someone the illusion? Because if you are the illusion, then there you are, just existing in a plane that we cannot perceive. So, I mean, at this point, the best that I've been able to come up with here is that we have our story, and our story is who we are. It is a reflection of us out into the universe, affecting everything that it comes into contact with. People will look back on me one day and see 8-year-old me, and see 30-year-old me, and 40-year-old me, and 60-year-old me. And even though I may be a different thing moment to moment, with or without a soul, I still have a complete story that people will look back on and people will remember and hopefully share and tell stories of me from my life. And there still very much is some type of existence there. The effects that I've had will echo through time, throughout eternity, and I have been part of this grand cause and effect nexus that exists, that is the universe, and there is no taking that away or watering it down. That I've said things to people, I've affected people, and that will forever be stored within their memory and will forever affect them as they go about their day. I've raised kids that will go on to the world with the lessons that I've taught them and will affect the world in a manner that reflects me. So there really is no taking me out of the equation. I mean, I was very much a part of this. I very much have a story here that took place. You can argue that my story is my soul. You can argue that it is just memory. But I think for now, we're going to go ahead and end it here, and I'm going to continue the discussion here on metaphysics, and we will go deeper into this in later episodes. Right now, I'm planning on doing an episode on AI, artificial intelligence, and the ramifications that it is going to have upon society going forward, and the different choices that we're going to be faced with, and what the future may look like as far as humanity and our relation to artificial intelligence. So I do thank you so much for joining me here again for this one. It's very much appreciated. Check out my Instagram at philosophical.reminders. The page is growing, and I'm really quite proud of the work that I've done on it, and I would encourage you to have a look at it and check it every morning, and it can give you a perspective on the day that might help you and go about the day in a manner where things will just feel easier for you and not feel so heavy. And if they do feel heavy, at least we will have a perspective that will allow us to embrace it rather than to run from it. Follow me wherever you're listening to this podcast, and go back and check out my previous episodes. Thank you guys so much for your time. I appreciate it. You guys take care.